So that circular supply chain is very important to make sure that we have figured out how to do that well. And that has really been a constraint for the industry, is that we figured out the science. I mean, no one can argue that 94% complete response in late stage multiple myeloma, multiple myeloma patients isn't great science, isn't great clinical efficacy. It absolutely is. It's unheard of, actually, in its ability to deliver clinical benefit to patients. But if we can't get it to patients at scale, it's not going to have the clinical or the commercial impact that companies want. So the real bottleneck up until today and still today is the ability to manufacture these products at high quality, at high throughput, and low cost. Oftentimes, these products cost somewhere between $450,000, and if you talk about the gene therapies, up to $4 million per patient. So that's per individual dose. And for the most part, that is unaffordable in most of the world. You know, in the US, these products are available in some parts of Western Europe, not all, and not all products. So if we want broad access, we need to be able to bring the cost down and we need to be able to make more of these products. And today we just can't physically make enough products. So we talked about, I went to Columbia for business school, and at that time, it's much more expensive now, but it seemed very expensive then. I think I graduated with $125,000 in student loan debt. And there's one thing that I remember from Columbia, one critical thing. I took operations class, and there was a book called The Goal. I don't know if you've ever read it, but it depicts some Cub Scouts, sort of Boy Scouts marching in a line. And there was one called Herbie who was a bit bigger than the other boys. He was a bit slower. Uh, and Herbie was the bottleneck. So this is how they teach you about bottlenecks in manufacturing, right? So the theory of constraints. So you have a system, all those boys in a row holding onto a rope, and there's one boy that's the slowest, and therefore slows down the entire group. That is how bottlenecks are described and what I remember. And today's bottleneck in cell therapy manufacturing is we have to, once we get the cells from the patient, we send them to the manufacturing facility. We have to thaw them, we have to select them, and that takes about an hour to do each of those things. But then we have to activate them, we have to genetically reprogram them, and we have to ultimately grow them up, expand them. And that process takes 7 to 10 days. A process that takes 7 to 10 days, let's say 248 hours, versus a product process that takes 1 hour, is clearly going to always be the bottleneck. And so addressing that bottleneck so that we can get higher throughput, we can take people out of the process, so dramatically lower cost of goods, and to improve consistency. And that's really where Ori has focused his attention, is on the core bottleneck in manufacturing, so that we can increase throughput, lower costs, improve quality. And by doing that, we are able to address the three core challenges that are facing cell therapy today. And what we've seen very, I would say, rationally, is that investors, at least right now, for the last couple of years, since 2021, have been very skeptical that autologous cell therapy, so that personalized version of cell therapy, is commercially viable. They're just not sure. Can we ever make enough of these products? Can we ever charge a price that will allow us to get, large numbers of patients? And the answer right now is we don't know. And so they've been focused on other modalities. In vivo cell therapy is very sexy right now because it eliminates this manufacturing problem. Allogeneic cell therapy has been thought of as a potential solution, but brings with it its own challenges. So we're trying to solve in a couple different ways. We're trying to solve this manufacturing bottleneck. How do we avoid having to manufacture these products in highly manual, very expensive ways that are very low throughput? And so automation solutions like Ori's, our Eero platform, is one of the ways that we can address this issue for autologous cell therapy. And they're also looking at other ways. And, I would argue that autologous cell therapy is here to stay. When you have the incredible clinical efficacy, the clinical impact that we see, and we've got a manufacturing problem, that we're going to figure that out. And we went through this with biologics, 20, 30 years ago. as well. And we're going to figure that out, and hopefully innovations like Ori's will help open up access for patients. We'll see with allogeneic. There's a lot of challenges with durability, with potency,
Mm.
where you have donor cells that go into a patient. We'll see if that ever makes the leap. I'm not sure. There's only one allogeneic product available today. And then in vivo, you think about actually we're going to do all that, all those steps that I mentioned, but we're going to do them inside the human body. It's complex biology, and we'll get there with that. I have a feeling, but it's probably, in my view, about 20 years away. So we need to make sure that we figure out today's challenge, today's bottleneck with autologous cell therapy, because you've got 20 years of patients that can benefit from it, if not more. So I think as an industry, the innovation will win out, and we'll see wide access, even first line. We're expecting Yescarta to receive first line approval this year, having gone all of these therapies started out as last line therapy, and they've worked their way forward. So you've got Breyanzi, you've got Carvykti that have second line approval alongside Yescarta. And the expectation is that Yescarta will get first line therapy. So patients will no longer have to go through chemo. They'll be able to get CAR T therapy as the first intervention. And that's a super exciting milestone for the industry and only increases the need for wider access, more cost-effective products, and better manufacturing. So that's the future, kind of the near term, I would say the next 3 to 5 years that we have to look forward to.
So it's basically really the manufacturing in cell and gene therapy, great results, great science, great clinical results, but from the manufacturing point of view, completely different, like small molecules. So it's
Totally different.
really tailored. Okay.
Yeah, no, it's an individual therapy. You think about all the rigor you go through to manufacture small molecules and to release the batch in a GMP context. And that's for, you're stamping out millions of tablets. That's what we did at Reckitt Benckiser and then
Yeah.
Indivior. We were a small molecule company. And that tablet could go to you, me, or anyone else. In this world, we're making one product using the same rigor, the same GMP context and framework. We're doing the same batch release. We're doing it for one product for one patient at a time. And that requires lots of innovation and automation to do that at scale. We're the whole industry in total treated 10,000 patients last year. And
Hmm.
that's 7 years post-launch for some of these products with 9 products. The whole industry treated 10,000 patients. That is less than 5% of the available patient population globally. So that's the challenge, is how do we greatly improve throughput and access and really make these products much more cost effective.
Yeah, it reminds me of the conversation I had with Christina Levin, where she also said manufacturing is basically the bottleneck. How can you do that for a large number of patients? Um, and I can't remember, maybe I do the conversation wrong, but I can't remember that we found the solution. She was more coming from the science side.
Mhm.
Um, what's your thinking process when we look into the future and you say you have all problems solved? How do you want to tackle this problem with Ori Biotech?
So I think there's a couple things we need to do to really get to where we want to get to. And the first really is to think about the supply chain from first principles, from the ground up. So we have essentially adopted the traditional pharma manufacturing and supply chain for biologics and small molecules, and we've applied it to cell therapy. That may not be the best way to deliver cell therapies. And just recently in the UK, the MHRA has put out a regulation saying that we can manufacture in the hospital at point of care for advanced therapies. And this regulatory framework didn't exist until the last few weeks it was finalized. And that might be one major step forward in trying to bring these products to patients at scale, because ultimately taking a patient's cells, flying them halfway across the world, manufacturing for them for 3 to 6 weeks, freezing them, flying them back to the patient to the hospital is probably never going to be cost effective. That sort of whole transportation mechanism is just very difficult. Not to mention, these patients are often very sick, and waiting 3 to 6 to 12 weeks for their product. A vast number, 25% of these patients die waiting for the product, even
Mm.
after it's been approved. So that logistical complexity needs to be solved. We need to figure out how do we bring these products to patients more quickly. The second thing I would suggest is that the processes we are using today are very inefficient. They're mostly human being led. So think about, the analogy that gets often used is Henry Ford making the Model T. going from hand person assembly to assembly line assembly, and then to ultimately to what you see in like a Tesla gigafactory today, where there's not a single human being anywhere to be seen. We are kind of in that very first stage. We've got highly manual, we've got a lot of very expensive PhD immunologists moving cells. They're micropipetting, they're doing tube welding, they're shaking bags back and forth like this. They're using T flasks. Essentially, it's a lab scale process on steroids today. And even the GMP manufacturing process that have been approved are those. And those don't scale, and they're not cost effective, and they're highly variable because no matter how good we are as human beings, we introduce variability into processes. So we need automation. We need to take the people out of the process because ultimately that's what has been proven to be uh, very effective in lowering costs and improving kind of standardization and quality. So we are in the process of doing that now, and that's part of what Ori is doing, is bringing automation to the core prop parts of the process that today are manual. And then lastly, I would suggest we need digitization. So a lot of the processes, the vast majority of processes that I've seen today are in paper.
On paper?
Yes, on
Really?
paper. Unfortunately, yes. So a paper batch record
Mhm.
for a single cell therapy over 1,000 pages. So you can stack 16 three-ring binders up on top of each other. And it takes two people to leaf through each page and say, that's okay, yes, that's all right, yes, tick the box, yes, to release a product. And that just not only the act of capturing the data on the paper, and putting it in a paper batch record, but ultimately the release process on paper will always be a bottleneck if we don't fix it. So we are working with several next generation companies that are doing paperless manufacturing where we plug our system into their software backbone, maybe their MES or LIMS or ELN system, so that we can do automatic, essentially real-time batch validation. So continuous validation, where the system is always looking for things that are anomalous, things that are deviations from the process. They will note them, and then ultimately all the human being right now has to do is to look at those deviations and say, okay, there were 3 times when something happened that we didn't expect. They all look okay to me. That batch is released. And they can do that if it's digital, they can do that from anywhere in the world. So the problem with being on paper is you have to have those resources in every manufacturing facility, and it has to be qualified by the regulator. In this distributed model, if you have, a hub and spoke model where you have multiple manufacturing sites, maybe at hospitals, you need to have a centralized QA and QC function. So you have the ability to review, your qualified person who's going to release that product has the ability to review that centrally on a digital file, digital batch record. And then they can be fully utilized as they're reviewing as products are finished at the various hubs. The batch record comes into or at the various spokes, the batch record comes into the hub. These kinds of innovations. So, standardization through automation, digitization, potentially for distributed manufacturing are how we will achieve widespread patient access for cell therapies and also dramatically shorter vein-to-vein times and lower cost of goods. It's really those mechanisms that we have at our disposal now. Just recently, I mean, we launched our Eero platform in December, so it's only been in the market for, what is that, eight months? And so we're just on the beginning of this next evolution of cell therapy manufacturing.
Before we dive into your Eero platform and educate the audience what that is, what you do, there are 3 points that I would tackle first from what you said, because I think they really matter and would like to unpack it a little bit more. I mean, the problem for the patient, we mentioned that sometimes when the product is produced, developed, it takes 3 to 6 weeks, sometimes longer, and some patients die. I mean, this is hard for the patient because when this is terminal illnesses, and once you lived with a patient who faced that, that's the ultimate fear these people have. So there's really they're facing death. There is nothing
Mhm.
worse than a human being facing death. And then you provide a solution to them and say, look, we have maybe something that works. Science is good, clinical results are good, but you won't live long enough to experience that. I mean, this is really
Mm.
hard
Mm.
for the people.
incredibly, incredibly hard. I mean, of course, no, the clinicians, the patients, no one goes into it thinking that that can happen, but it happens because the first generation CAR T products were for um, mostly for blood cancers, hematological tumors. So think leukemia, lymphoma, myeloma, and they were reserved for last line therapy. You had very, very sick patients who had weeks to live. So there's two ways we try and handle this, obviously, is by treating them earlier in the treatment pathway. So if they're less sick, have been through less rounds of chemotherapy, there's a chance that they'll have a better, clinical outcome. And the second is being able to shorten that time, shorten that wait time, and get the product to patients more quickly. And these are the ways in which we can intervene and try and prevent this outcome. Because exactly as you said, I mean, this is something that every cancer patient faces from the time they're thinking about from the time they're diagnosed, is
Mm.
that there's a potential that I'm going to die here. Chemotherapy only works in a certain proportion of patients, and you've got some immunotherapies, and then particularly after they fail bone marrow transplant or something similar, there's just not a lot of options. And then
Yeah.
outside the US today, CAR T therapy really isn't available. It's available for a couple in several countries of Europe, but not widely available. And outside of Europe, it's not available really anywhere. You look in China, you look in India, you look in the Middle East, you look at, so there's very, very few patients who can even consider this as an option. So you're right. I mean, I can't think of anything worse, as a someone who had a loved one who has cancer, to say there's this cure out there, but it's not available in our country, or you can't get access to it, or you're too late stage. It'll take too long and you're going to die waiting. I mean, what a incredibly hard thing that would be to hear that news. And, a lot of these patients are often children. As a parent, you can imagine how absolutely terrible that would be to hear.
Yeah, and this play between emotions, fear and hope. This is really unfair to the
Mm,
patient. And I mean, maybe it's also a result of high drug prices. I mean, the US has a lot of advanced therapies because they pay the best and they pay the best. And when you take that away and lower the prices, what you also kill on the sa at the same time is availability of advanced therapies because I mean there is not enough margin anymore,
mm,
and people just don't move the therapies there. I know from firsthand, it was 5 years ago, and I was on the Christina Levin podcast, that what that means for hospitals is when you want to localize the manufacturing, you need GMP approval at the hospital. You need, you mentioned also quality controls. You need actually the whole production process locally in the hospital. And the guest on the podcast with Christina said our healthcare system is just not designed for that.
mhm,
It's just designed for small molecules. You ship it, you give it to the people, and that's it.
mhm.
What do we need to remodel in the healthcare system to make a tremendous change so that these therapies are really available in time and not
Yeah.
just weeks or months later?
I mean, I would argue that today that they're right. We aren't fit for purpose to do this yet. But with the advent of some of these new technologies, we can be. And so having to set up a GMP manufacturing suite in a hospital used to be quite a lot of effort, quite a lot of money. There are hospitals around Europe that do have it and to do these things. I was just recently at Hospital Clinic Barcelona. They've been treating over the last 10 years 500 patients with CAR T therapy, with a therapy that they developed. It can be done. You can build out the expertise, but you need lots of very experienced, highly skilled people. You need GMP clean room space. You need all of the systems in place. And so the way we are helping to navigate that is to develop essentially a turnkey manufacturing solution. So
Mhm.
we've got partners like Germ Free, who's one of the leaders in mobile clean rooms. And so they can put in the car park or on the back of a lorry clean room, and it can be dropped off anywhere in the world. And then we put our technology inside that doesn't require highly skilled operators. You and I could be a trained operator in an hour or two. So even high school graduates or secondary school graduates can operate the system. And so if we're able to bring some of these innovations, then it doesn't seem so far-fetched that we could deliver this at the hospital. And I would argue, things like bone marrow transplantation, or a lot of hospitals now have radiology um, trucks, or they have lab. trucks that didn't used to get done at the hospital. They used to get done somewhere else by someone else, but they brought that to the hospital, to the point of care. And I would argue that this is doable with innovations like the ones that we've been talking about. We can't do it today because of paper batch records and, manual processes and all these things that we've been talking about. But with the era of technology and some of our partner technologies and companies, you can create a turnkey manufacturing suite that can go anywhere. You can have a network of hospitals that are manufacturing CAR T therapies on site for patients at very low cost and very quickly. And that is the future. And we're talking the future, not 10 years away, but in the next year or two, we'll see this. And we're talking both in the UK and also in countries like India in the Middle East, where they want to leapfrog to this model. They want to actually have this be the beginning of how they deliver CAR T therapy. And just now, these technologies are enabling that to occur.
So if we want to improve the situation for patients, make these advanced therapies available for everybody in the world who needs it, one part of the solution is mobile labs, mobile production facilities, mobile clean rooms. You just ship that and send them on trucks, for example, to the hospital that needs it. Easy to train, automated. But then there was a bottleneck that I was really surprised to hear. You said a lot of the healthcare system is still on paper in
Mm.
2025 in the Western world.
Mhm.
Is this really such a big problem today?
Remarkably, yes, it is a problem. I think my statistic is out of date, but a couple of years ago, I heard the statistic that 60% of patient records in the UK, the NHS, were still on paper. Now, I can't imagine that's still the case,
Mm,
but until Obama in the US forced electronic records onto hospitals and medical practices, it was the case in the US not that long ago. Because the inertia of trying to get an EMR in and trying to digitize patient records is extremely difficult. So it would not surprise me at all if the predominant tools that were being used were still analog, still paper-based. Certainly in cell therapy manufacturing, that is true. Even big pharma companies that are doing manufacturing, because if you're stamping out 1 million tablets, having a checklist on paper once a month or once a quarter when you run a manufacturing batch or even once a
mm,
week, it's not a rate limiter. But if you have to do that for every single dose that you produce for every single patient, you get a mountain of paper that just gets overwhelms you. And so this is another reason why we need to rethink this process, is to do this well and to certainly do it in a distributed manner. You have to have a digital first approach. And our technology is cloud native. You can monitor it from anywhere in the world. You can intervene if something goes wrong. You don't have to go into the clean room. You can do QA and QC remotely. It will deliver the data into a batch record, via API. So in the cloud, these kinds of tools are required to do this at scale and to do this in a distributed fashion. So unfortunately, I think your assertion is correct. The vast majority of the institutions that are involved in this are still on paper.
still on paper. That's amazing. That's
I know.
amazing. So we need to solve this first before we can think about advanced therapies at the end of the day. If you develop with Ori Biotech and also the scientists with cell and gene therapy advanced solutions, and then you have a systemic bottleneck at the end of the day, it kills the entire thinking process and investment. So this is something for the policymakers that, especially here in Europe, where they need to speed up and get all healthcare systems in every single country on speed.
Well, I think yes, it certainly needs to be done. Our turnkey solution is digital already. So
Mm.
you don't have to fix the whole problem before you could, if you wanted to, deliver advanced therapies to patients digitally. We can do it now. As part of that turnkey solution, it has a digital backbone embedded in it. So if we had to wait for hospitals to digitize, we'd all be here till 2070. We weren't willing to wait, so we did it ourselves. But you're right. I think it's a critical component to. I mean, now as you know, you've got lots of different systems that don't talk to each other. You go to a specialist and they don't have your records. You got to bring your patient record with you. You know, it is what it is. Certainly it's incredibly inefficient, but we've sort of gone around that problem by creating a whole turnkey solution that's already digital.
Can you tell me more about your turnkey solution? What is your place in the industry?
So the Euro platform is one of the first technologies that fully automates cell therapy manufacturing. So we talked about the core bottleneck, where all those people are involved and where all the time is lost around the genetic reprogramming and activation of cells and expansion of cells. That is, as I said, about, let's say, 240 hours in a probably 260-hour process, something like that. So it's the vast majority of the process is that particular set of steps. So the Eero system is an automation device. It looks a little bit like an incubator or microwave oven, something like that, turned on its end, where it automates all of the steps associated with activation of cells, genetic reprogramming of cells, and expansion of cells. So that allows operators to go off and do other things that are more value added other than micropipetting or tube welding. It also allows us to parallelize manufacturing. So within that, remember I was telling you about that tractor trailer kind of uh, cargo shipping container clean room in 1,000 square feet, and you'll have to translate that into square meters for the audience. In 1,000 square feet of clean room space, so essentially, whatever that is, 4 by 20 space, something like that. We can do up to 30 parallel manufacturing processes. So 30 different patient doses at the same time, which will allow us to deliver 1,000 doses a year in 1,000 square feet of clean room space. That is a 95% reduction in the amount of clean room space you need today to manufacture the same number of doses. So we're shrinking the footprint dramatically by multiplexing the system. So essentially stacking it up on each other. So you can go 3 high and 10 wide. So I can run multiple patients. So I can make a product for you, me, and 28 other people. And I can even do different products. So potentially we could manufacture things like Kymriah, Yescarta, Carvykti, Breyanzi in the same room using the same piece of equipment for different patients. So multi-product, multi-patient in the same space. Because it's a closed system, we have the ability to make sure that there's no mix-ups, the wrong ingredients don't go into the wrong place, and there's no cross-contamination risk. So it's all digitally controlled, it's all automated, and that innovation, the ability to deliver that many doses in that small a space that quickly, will have a revolutionary impact on the ability to supply these products to patients. And that is the only way we can really think about distributed manufacturing, taking the production to the hospital, because otherwise you'd have to have a single box, a single clean room
Mm.
for every product. So one for Kymriah, one for Yescarta, one for Breyanzi, one for Abecma, and that would never work. That would be, you just have a bunch of unused capacity, a bunch of unused infrastructure, and it would drive costs through the roof. But if you have the ability in the same manufacturing space to manufacture multiple products on the same equipment, that changes the game. And that's ultimately what we're trying to do. And it's going to take some work with the regulator. But the regulator in the US, the FDA, is very, very keen on ensuring patients get access to these therapies. And they've introduced a couple new regulatory innovations. So one is the Advanced Manufacturing Technology Innovation. So it's a designation for platforms like Ori's to essentially get a stamp of approval from the FDA saying this technology is suitable for the manufacture of cell therapies, and it gives a higher level of interaction with therapy developers. There's some benefits to getting your product through the FDA faster because they want to see these products make it to patients. The FDA works incredibly hard to evaluate um, new drug applications, to approve products, and then they sit back and watch these products really not get utilized. And they watch the companies fail who've spent $1 billion developing them. And that's incredibly frustrating for them. And so, of course, they will never sacrifice safety, patient safety, but they're doing everything they can to ensure that these products reach patients at scale. And so this AMT designation is an example of trying to speed the marketing and access and distribution of these products to patients. And that's what we need. We need these kind of innovations to be able to deliver this new generation of therapies. We need to break out of the old biotech playbook, break out of the old centralized manufacturing models with giant facilities, and deliver these products in a different way, in a novel way, because they're novel therapies, and we need to think differently about how we do that.
Yeah, that's true. This was also a conclusion with Christina. At the end of the day, you need to remodel that. I remember the conversation with small hospitals, for example, a few years ago, what it means, cell and gene therapy, when you want to have it in the hospital and the patients and treat the patients, you need high investments in the team and facilities. You have high annual running expenses, and then you need to explain to the investors why you have these high expenses for a handful of patients every year.
Hmm.
And this is really a hard conversation, especially when the investors are not really familiar with healthcare, but just have some philanthropic spirit behind them and
Hmm.
are used to these at-scale manufacturing systems where you say you push through a lot of patients and people through the system
Hmm.
and not invest for a few patients. How does the work with you change the situation? So if an investor comes to me and says, how can how can we do this better? And I tell them, go talk to Jason, talk with Ori Biotech, they have a solution. What changes with your solution for them?
Yes. So there's a couple of things. So I would call on the analogy of labs in hospitals. So there's been cyclical application of outsourced centralized labs. We send everything to like a LabCorp or a Quest Diagnostics or somebody, and they do all of our lab work, and then they ship us back the result. And then hospitals said, well, actually, we're paying margin to those companies. We should bring that lab in-house, and we develop our own lab, and then we send them downstairs, and then they run the labs, and they send them upstairs in the hospital. And this goes back and forth because the like manufacturing labs are a capacity utilization business. They make money every time they process a sample.
Mm,
And so that lab needs to run at a certain level of utilization to make it make sense financially. And it's exactly the same as manufacturing. To your point, if we're making one or two doses a year or 10 patient once a month for 10 patients, it's never going to make economic sense because you've got infrastructure and you've got people and you've got fixed cost investment. What does work or would work is the having a certain level of capacity utilization. So being able to use that module for multiple products and getting enough volume through that location so that it makes sense. And so we're partnering with CDMOs globally whose expertise it is to manufacture cell therapies. We don't supply the people or the expertise. We supply the technology. So we would supply that, maybe a germ-free pod from our partners there. We'd put our technology inside, we'd build out this turnkey model, and then someone needs to staff it. It might be hospital staff, it might be a CDMO partner staff. And so we're talking about these different models. Could it be completely outsourced? And then who pays and who's responsible for the quality of the product? Is it the MA holder? Is it the CDMO? Is it the hospital? There's a couple of these questions that we need to answer. But ultimately, if you can get enough volume through that manufacturing space, if you can get a high enough capacity utilization, the economics work. And if you can't, they don't. And so maybe you don't have one of these at every hospital. Maybe you have one, in Vienna to serve all the hospitals in Vienna, or in London to serve, or two or three in London to serve all the hospitals in London. So you need to think about maybe a regional center of excellence model where you might have the ability to manufacture for multiple hospitals, hundreds, if not thousands of patients at a time. We just did an analysis on the back of the MHRA regulation that came out a couple weeks ago. If we were to put 5 locations in the UK, we could serve all the patients. There's 66 million people in the UK. We could serve all of the patients within a 4-hour drive. So a 4-hour drive to a location, to a hospital, we could serve all the patients from 5 locations. You don't need 100 locations. You don't need one at every hospital.
mm,
You just need them at the major centers potentially. And in the US, it's something like 34. We did the analysis many years ago to say we could actually out of 35 centers, we could serve 60% of the patient population within an 8-hour drive. Now, obviously, bigger geographies in the US, farther to go. But the thought process is the same with, you don't need one in every community and every hospital. And now today we're talking about cancer. If you think about the application of cell therapy beyond cancer, we're seeing it being studied with great effectiveness in autoimmune disease. Think lupus or RA or some of these other diseases, um, autoimmune diseases. That has a totally different model required because these patients aren't going to MD Anderson, or they aren't going to the Christie, or they aren't going to other major cancer centers, the Fraunhofer. Um, they're in the community being treated by community specialists. And so you need a different model for those. And so if you think about this regional model, the equipment, the Euro equipment is can just as easily make a therapy for autoimmune disease as it can for cancer. It doesn't know the difference. It's a cell therapy, and the cell therapy is a cell therapy for the technology. So as you get more of these products approved, this model becomes more and more sensible. It just makes more and more sense because you can then get it to patients no matter where they are, not only in cancer centers, but also at community-based care. And you're seeing innovators like Johnson& Johnson and Legend Biotech in their CARTITUDE. So they continue to study CARVYKTI in different patient populations. In their latest trial, they said they were treating 30% of the patients, of cancer patients, in the community at community cancer centers. So the ability to take these therapies out into the community to reach more patients, to get a bigger network of treating clinicians, that direction of travel lends itself very nicely to this more distributed model, and the thinking around how do we get these products to patients more quickly. So that's how I would argue, we need to think about this innovation as it's ultimately manufacturing as a capacity utilization business. If you have too much capacity and not enough doses going through it, you're going to be losing money. That's what's happening today. We have these giant facilities. We have only a couple hundred doses going through. It's costing too much money, and companies are folding. So we need to make sure we have a smart way to enable capacity to be utilized. And the way we've designed the Aero system is that you can essentially scale up in a stair-step fashion. So you can maybe have an infrastructure that can deliver 1,000 doses. And then when you get to 70% utilization, maybe you want to add another 1,000 doses of capacity.
Mhm.
But what you don't want to do at the beginning is to deliver 4,000 doses or 10,000 doses of capacity, because that's going to sit idle for years and years. And that is what ultimately ends up costing, millions and millions of dollars. So it's these new delivery models enabled by technology that are going to have to solve this problem.
So it's basically the invention of an entire new industry within the pharma industry.
It is a somewhat new delivery model. I mean, it's been being done as kind of a cottage industry in hospitals. So regenerative medicine, bone marrow, stem cell transplantation, some of these things have been done at the hospital in the basement, tinkering around with the scientists. But it's never been done at scale. You
Mhm.
treat a patient or two, a month or a week. But now we're trying to industrialize this. So, the way I could talk about it is mass personalization. These are personalized therapies. Again, we're making one for Christian, but it won't work for Jason. So I need to do that personalized basis, but I need to do it for the masses. I need to be doing tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of doses. And how do I balance mass personalization? That seems like they're competing thoughts, they're opposites. But being able to do this at scale, it's going to take mass personalization. And it does. It requires a whole new delivery model for therapeutics that doesn't exist or hasn't existed up until now.
Yeah, that's interesting. When I talk with scientists, I often hear that they want to develop the next big thing in therapies and wants to bring a new therapy to the patient.
Mhm.
And before a biotech, you focused on the manufacturing. How was the thinking process from the early days of Ori Biotech until now to come to the conclusion that this is your strategic position in the industry and not develop the next therapy? Was it uh, a revelation at the beginning that your founder had and said we just do this thing, or was it a longer process where you focused the team and discussed a lot and moved forward? How was the reality of coming to your conclusion?
So the two founders of Ori, as I mentioned at the time, were both professors at University College London in the biochemical engineering department. So they were doing a lot with bioreactors and systems that were doing the manufacturing of biologics and other things. And so they were ideally suited to, and also UCL has a very long history in regenerative medicine. So, some of the leading cell therapy companies were spun out of UCL in the UK. So they had this kind of the confluence of these two competencies, if you will, within UCL, within the department that Chris and Farland worked in. And they were also very close to Bruce Levine and Carl June's labs at UPenn. So Bruce and Carl are credited as the kind of creators of Kymriah, the very first cell therapy, which is now licensed by Novartis. And so when Bruce came over to present some of the early data, early clinical data for Kymriah, he came to London, sat down with Chris and Farland, the founders of Ori, before the company was founded, and they said, "Well, how are we going to make these products? How are we going to make them at scale?" So they're always thinking about the delivery process. They're always thinking about the manufacturing process. They weren't thinking about, finding a new target or a new molecule or a new cell type. And so it was really the combination of those factors. And Bruce has sat on our scientific advisory board for the last 5 or 6 years, has been a great help to the company. But having some of the best minds in therapy development and cell therapy come together with some of the best engineering, biochemical engineering minds, it was that confluence. And ultimately, they were always trying to solve the access problem. And they first tried by taking, legacy systems that existed then that were being used in regenerative medicine. This is 2015. Ori was founded in 2015. Some of this data was presented in 2013, 14. So it's been, a decade. And there were systems available there at that time that were doing regenerative medicine. They were doing, making stem cell therapies or were involved in bone marrow transplantation. And so they tried to use those systems. They tried to say, well, can we just repurpose systems that already exist, bioreactors that already exist? There's bioreactors that rock back and forth like this. There's stirred tank bioreactors. There's ones that turn the wall around like this. And they tried everything. They looked at everything that existed. They tried to, duct tape them together and use some bubble gum and try and get us to work. And they couldn't find anything that would work for the diversity of cell types, for the kind of specific needs of cell therapy. So they were always trying to apply an engineering solution to a manufacturing problem while focusing on biology. The last point is very, very important. What most companies have done, including some of Ori's peer companies, is they've applied an engineering solution to a manufacturing problem, but they haven't focused on the biology, or they haven't focused enough on the biology. And the biology is absolutely critical. We're a biology first company. Like if you don't get the right cell types, the right cell yields, the right phenotypes, the right potency and durability, you don't have anything. You don't have a product. You're not actually doing cell therapy, therapeutic manufacturing. You might be growing cells, but you're not having the clinical impact ultimately. So you have to be focused on the biology. And so we have married those competencies together, core deep biological expertise and core deep engineering expertise. And getting those two things to work together and mesh together has been a very difficult experience. Engineers and biologists think totally differently, and we're very fortunate to have very smart people that are collaborating together. But it's not easy, when we see a lot of square pegs being trying to jam into round holes because you've got an engineering solution. It looks like it should work. It looks like it should solve the problem. Maybe it fixes the bottleneck, but it delivers very low quality
Mhm.
product at the end. And so you've actually you fell over at the very first hurdle. And there are systems that have been around for a decade that engineering works well, but doesn't deliver the biology. And that ultimately is what has hamstrung the industry and why something like Eero is required now.
That's an interesting point that you brought up. It always feels to me when you look at companies that the most successful companies work at the intersection of different disciplines. Like you said, in case of
Mm.
Ori Biotech, um, deep know-how in engineering and the same deep know-how in biology. But for me, it's always the mystery when I look at people, different disciplines, it's sometimes really hard to get them work together and collaborate.
Yes.
And as you said, you brought the example like round things into square pegs and they don't really fit together. And I see many companies fall apart in that process because people
Yes.
just don't get along well. And that's a leadership um, core competence. What's
Mm.
your secret at Ori Biotech? How do you get this?
Ooh.
Different solutions, different people fit into one model and get them collaborating into a successful company.
It's part of the secret sauce. I don't know if I can tell you all the details, but no, you're right. It's an
I'm
incredibly
all
difficult
ears.
thing to do. It's an incredibly difficult thing to do. We are, one of my 3 points that I'd written down that you had asked me about is focus on talent. Talent is what makes a difference in a business, in a startup. Everyone's like, oh, I try and recruit the best talent. Yeah, of course you do. Everyone does. But how do you motivate that talent? How do you retain that talent? How do you get that talent to work in an environment that, is dynamic and work with others that aren't like them? And that's the real secret sauce. That's really difficult to do. We hire top talent. We do a lot of things that no other company that I know of does to try and motivate and retain that talent. And it's not about money. I mean, I think a lot of companies feel like, well, if I give them a bonus of 10 or 20% for hitting their KPIs, then I'm doing what I'm supposed to do, and they're going to stay and be very excited to work from us. I think most people, once you take money off the table, they aren't motivated by money. What they're really motivated by is making a difference. They want to have a big purpose, and so we lead very much with our purpose as a company. Our purpose is to enable widespread patient access to life-saving cell and gene therapies. Everyone that works at Ori gets out of bed for that reason, not because we're paying them at the top of the market or because we're giving them a bonus. And also, we want to give them a chance to do great things. And so things like autonomy, mastery, are they getting better at the skills they want to build? Are they making decisions for themselves? These kinds of things, building these into a company culture are incredibly difficult, especially culturally. There's a lot of top-down cultures that, the boss, what the boss says goes, the boss tells me what to do and I go do it. And that's not how you build a great business, and that's not how you retain top employees. One of the things, I'll give you one specific example, which I think is super interesting. So most companies, when they do talent reviews every year, they will, say, okay, here are your objectives for the year. Here's what you achieved. You have a meeting with your boss, that you get a rating. You're a top performer, or maybe you're a very good performer, or you're an average performer, and they'll grade you on a bell curve. Every single big company I've ever worked for had this kind of process. And for your top performers, they'll say, and maybe that's 5% of your team in a big company, they'll say, well, you get a 6% raise. Isn't that great? Congratulations. And then for your other, very good performers, the 20%, maybe they get a 4% raise. And then your average performers, they get a 2% raise. So what are we doing for those top 5%, for those top performers? We are putting a cap on their ability to earn. So we're saying all of you can, even if you're the best person in the whole company, the most you're ever going to get is 6% a year until maybe you change jobs and you get a little bit of an extra bonus. We're putting a cap on their earnings. And if you're a top performer, your earnings in the marketplace, your earnings potential is going like this, right? So what happens when your market rate, your value in the market is here and we're paying you this? And there's a very big gap here. What happens? You leave. Of course you do. You're a rational person. Someone's saying I can make 30% more, 40% more out in the marketplace. I'm going to leave the company. So we put systems in place and processes in place that actually drive our top performers out of the business. Those that are most valuable, we drive them out. And the people that are in the fat part of the bell curve, who don't have a lot of other options, stick around. They're like, oh, I'm happy to make 2%. This is talent dilution in action.
Yeah.
Reed Hastings from Netflix wrote a whole book about this, which is an awesome book. It's called No Rules Rules, about culture, the culture of Netflix. It's probably on your shelf there
This
somewhere.
one, yeah.
That's the one there. Awesome book. It's the only book I've ever read, business book, cover to cover, and then flipped
Mhm.
it over and started reading again from page one.
Really?
I thought it was that interesting. And we modeled a lot of the way we think about culture after that book. But to say we're actually driving our top talent out of the business by putting systems like that in place. So we don't do that. What we do is we mark our employees to market every quarter. So I say, I'll ring you up and I'll say, Christian, we just did your benchmarking for the quarter. You've dropped 10% below what we think your benchmark should be. We're just going to bump your salary up to 10 by 10% to make sure you're at benchmark. Have a nice day. You didn't have to call me up and say, hey, I got another job. Sorry, they're going to pay me 30% more. Oh, we'll match it. Please stay. We love you. That's the way most companies operate. It's ridiculous. We need to make sure if I employ you and I know that you're top talent, I should be willing to pay you market rate or more because I know how good you are. If I'm not willing to pay you market rate, of course you're going to leave. You're going to go do something else. So we have very high retention rates. We have very high job satisfaction rates. And it's not easy. It's not like everyone's always nice to each other. It's always, working at Ori is a picnic every day. We have our challenges. But when you have people that are motivated by the big purpose, they're fairly compensated and they're learning and they're, autonomous, they're driving their career forward. Those are very good building blocks to have people want to stay in the business and to be motivated and deliver the best result.
This is really great what you do. There are 3 points that are important, I think, to double down. Purpose. So people want to have a purpose. You motivate them by purpose, and you embody that in your company. Very often I feel when I look at the industry, I mean, a VC wanting to make money is not a purpose that drives people forward
Mhm.
to do great things. The second one that you mentioned is team development. You need to develop people. They don't come ready-made into the company, and when they see a purpose, they want also to evolve as a human being.
Yes.
And then the third thing is it's still money. You said at the beginning, money doesn't motivate people, but it has an important role. And what I see in Europe, especially, is very often that money is just a cost factor, and you're forced to keep costs down and don't pay people well because actually they are founders and should not make a lot of money. Why is money still important?
It is important up to a point. So, in Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? So at the base layer, food and shelter. If we're worried about, can I pay for my kid to go to college, or am I going to worry about where my next meal is going to come from, or can I take a holiday? I'm going to be thinking about those things because those things are at the base. Holidays aren't at the base layer, but you know what I mean? These are important things that are kind of basic for people. So you have to pay well enough so that people feel valued
Mm.
and that they aren't thinking about money anymore. Because if I'm busy thinking about, well, the guy next to me is making 10% more and he's an idiot, then I'm going to be distracted by that. I can't do my best work in that scenario. But if I feel like, you know what, the company values me, I'm getting paid a fair wage. Maybe it's not the highest amount of money I could make out there in the world, but it's a fair wage. It frees me to think about these other things, frees me to think about
Mm.
purpose and to think about, some of the autonomy and mastery that we are talking about. So money is important up to a point. And actually, yeah, I don't know if you have it on your shelf there, but Dan Pink did a lot of work on this, another great business author. And he actually said that carrot and stick incentives. So the idea of I pay you a bonus if you succeed of doing these two or three things, or I punish you if you don't achieve them, cause worse performance, not better. And that is a counterintuitive finding for every single business that exists out there. Every single business I know has KPI driven bonus schemes. They have, carrot and stick incentives all over the place. And what he said, the reason for this, if you're making widgets and I pay you per widget, you're going to make as many widgets as possible. Then the carrot incentive system works. But if I need you to think creatively about problem solving, what those kinds of incentives do, they narrow our field of view. So we are focused on that. I'm going to hit that KPI. I am going to deliver that objective and I'm going to get that bonus. And that's what I'm doing because I'm a human being and I respond to incentives. But maybe there's something just out here or just over here that I could be doing that's more important, or there's an opportunity for innovation that I don't see because I'm blinkered by that carrot that's dangling in front of me. And he cites the candle problem, which is a well-known problem in psychology where people have to essentially think laterally, think creatively to solve the problem. And most people don't when they're offered an incentive. When they're not offered an incentive, they often do solve the problem. So it is that kind of, it's the ability, it kind of blinkers us as human beings. And so the psychology behind money, you got to understand how it motivates people and what it does to them and what it does to their ability to innovate. I need people that innovate, that think laterally, that are looking for creative solutions because we would have never gotten to where we are without people that thought that way. And so we can't afford to put the blinkers on them by using those kinds of incentive programs. But again, this is thinking that most organizations don't employ. Maybe they might know about it and not believe it. I have to admit my own board thinks I'm crazy at times when I talk about these things, but I truly believe that they are part of the secret of Ori's success thus far.
Yeah, it's always the crazy ones who build great companies. But this is, I think, I agree to what you say. I think this is the trinity of successful companies. Anybody who wants to build a valuable business has to focus on getting the best people. And the 3 points that you mentioned, I think, are fundamental to get the best people and to keep the best people in the company. It's purpose. People want to have a purpose. Development perspective. Great people wants to develop and evolve. They don't want to get stuck and take their worries away. I think this is the role of money. I mean, if someone has to worry about can I pay school for my kids or can I pay rent or where do I get food, like what you said with Maslow, they
Mhm.
are not focused on your business. They are focused on worrying. And if you
Exactly.
want them to focus on developing a valuable business, pay them well.
Yeah. And it's really funny. So Dan Pink does a YouTube presentation on this. It's like he's got a 10-minute version, there's like a 30-minute version. He boils this down to business doesn't do what science knows. The science is very clear on this stuff, on human motivation and why people behave the way they do. The science
Mm.
is very clear. Business doesn't do what science knows. And that's, you've just laid it out very fundamentally. It makes logical sense. Most businesses don't do it because it's not the norm. It's not what they're used to. And that for better reason, I guess hopefully it's a competitive advantage for Ori if we can do things a little bit different.
Absolutely, absolutely. I think you mentioned three tastings and look for how far Netflix got. I mean, and you are doing similar thing.
Incredible.
But you also, I mean, you also convinced investors. I read in your material that you have raised with your team since 2019 $140 million
Correct.
in an environment that was not nice, nice, not nice. How was that for your team?
Uh, Fundraising is terrible. I think it's a necessary evil in a startup. People say I'm good at it. I don't know what that means exactly,
Mm,
but we've been blessed to have partner investors that really believe in our mission and they want to build a big business and an enterprise that has a big impact. So it is really important to get investors whose vision aligns with yours, as founders, as a management team. But fundraising is a war of attrition. It just really is. You just have to make the calls. You have to do the outreach. You have to, I mean, impolitely, I say you got to kiss a lot of frogs until you find your prince or your princess. It's sort of, there is ultimately business is a human endeavor, right? So, and believe it or not, investors are human beings. And when you interface with them, they have the same hopes and dreams and fears that you do, and they will have family members who've had cancer. They will understand this challenge in intuitive ways, and so finding the right investor that believes in what the team's doing, that believes in the management team, that sees the opportunity and wants to support you is incredibly difficult to find all of those pieces and to match them up. And routinely, it always takes me 9 months or longer to raise money. So, whether it's a good market or bad, even in 2021 when it was quote unquote easy, or 2020 and 2021, it was easy to raise money. Still took 9 months. It's just how long it takes. You have to make all those calls and do all those pitches and have all those discussions. And there's a lot of people out there that are really good at this and good at training founders at doing this. And they'll tell you that storytelling is a critical skill to build as a founder. You must be able to tell the story of the disease area, of your technology, of your company, of yourself, of the history. You need to be able to engage other human beings on an emotional level. That might be investors, that might be future employees, that might be board members, that might be, who knows, customers, partners. There's ultimately the only thing that's happening at work is one human being talking to another human being. That's the only thing that's happening at work, right? So you need to be able to tell the story, and that is a skill set that not every founder possesses, and not every founder thinks is important. So I'm an angel investor, as I said. I've got a portfolio of 20 companies that I've invested in, all in the intersection of healthcare and technology, and many of them have a technical background, technical or scientific background, and rather impolitely I say to them, no one gives a shit about your technology. Excuse my French, And because most of technologists are really excited about the technology,
Mm.
and they'll tell you all for hours. They will tell you about the technology, and they'll tell you every last detail, and they'll tell you every minute, incremental benefit. No one cares. No one cares about that. They don't care about your science either. What they really care about is this problem serious enough to try and solve? Can it deliver venture returns? Is this the team to try and solve the problem? And does the technology have a chance of actually delivering that benefit, delivering that solution? If you can answer yes to those four questions, you're investable. If it's no to any of those questions, you're not investable. And when you spend a whole 30 or 60-minute call talking about your technology, you're not answering the other three questions. You're only answering one question. And that is the biggest downfall that I see of technical founders and technical teams. They spend hours and hours talking about the science or hours and hours talking about the technology, and they're not answering the right questions. And that is the biggest challenge people have with fundraising, in my experience.
Yeah, I totally agree to what you say. And you put it very nicely with the three important points. And the fourth one, um, you first need the big problem and understand the problem, and that there's really a willingness to pay so that you can deliver venture returns. I think this is a point that is very often forgotten, that venture
Hmm.
capitalists actually want to make money at the end of the day. They have to,
They
otherwise they
have to.
don't. And the third one, the team. And I would take it a step further. You don't even need to have a solution yet. You don't need the solution. If you can deliver the first three parts,
Right.
you are already investable, because the solution very often you can buy. There are so many people with great tech on the market who
Yes,
just lack these 3 points.
that's right. Or you're betting that the team's going to be able to deliver a solution, whatever it is, and you just bet on the team to do so, especially particularly early. If you're doing pre-seed or seed investing, they just bet on the team. You guys will figure it out. We assume so. Go, here's some money. Go do it.
Yeah.
You're exactly right. Yeah, you're exactly right.
I like the Microsoft story. I think Bill Gates, this is what Bill Gates did in the early days of Microsoft. I mean, he saw the problem, he saw the solution. He had the customers at the end of the day willing to pay, and then he just went out of the market, on the market, and bought it and delivered
Hmm.
it and
Hmm.
founded Microsoft with that.
Yeah, and he's one of the most impactful change makers ever. You think about the impact of that innovation
Yeah.
on business, and then ultimately what he's done with the Gates Foundation. One of the most incredible change makers ever.
We still use Microsoft these days at the end of
We
the day.
do.
You mentioned also one important point that I would like to dig a little bit deeper. I very often hear these hero stories. I went out on the market 6 weeks and I closed the round, and it's so great. And
Yeah.
you say 9+ months. Can you lead the audience through a standardized fundraising process? Why should they plan for 9 to 12 months?
So 9 to 12 months is the active fundraising phase. You should have spent 6 to 12 to 24 months ahead of that building relationships with the investors who you intend to pitch. So it's not only a 9 month process. I knew all the investors that were going to invest in Ori before that for a year or 2 years.
Mhm.
Um, and you want them to believe in you and believe in what you're doing, be interested in what you're doing, even if you're not investable for them now. You haven't hit the phase of growth or a stage where they might invest, but you want them to know about you. They want them to follow the story. And that network building and rapport building is a constant effort, and it's something that most founders lack, and they do not pay enough attention to. They think, I go out, I flash my technology, I get a check. And that, unfortunately, you see things with AI today where that happens, and that leads people to believe that that's the norm, and that's the exception, not the rule. Um, where you can get funded on a business plan and nothing else. But outside of those kind of major boom, we talked about the 2000 dot-com bubble. It was a similar time. Any business plan is getting funded, and we saw how that ended. I'm afraid that something similar might happen with the AI boom, but we'll see. Ultimately, the way to do it right and the way to do it consistently is to develop those relationships 12 months, 24 months ahead of time. You want people knowing your company. You want to be able to build your founder brand. So I'm very active on LinkedIn, as you saw, getting to people to know Ori, know what Ori's up to be a credible source of information for the industry, helps with business development, it helps with investors, it helps with employee recruitment. You need to get your company's name out there. You need to get it known. And that takes work, takes time. You have to invest time in that. But those things pay dividends when it comes time to fundraising. And you hear, oh, I've been following the story, or yeah, I remember we spoke a year ago, and you kept me up to date. That's great. We know what's the latest. If you're coming in cold, 3 months before you run out of runway, you're stuffed. I mean, maybe someone might, you might get lucky, but that's not the way to successfully fundraise. So you got to build the foundation, 12 to 24 months ahead of time with the next round of investors. When you kick off the process, it's very important that you target the right investors. A lot of fundraising is massively time consuming, while at the same time you're trying to run a business. You're a startup, things are running. The day job doesn't go away, but you got this whole new other day job you've got to do. And fundraising is massively time consuming. So don't waste your time pitching the wrong investors. A lot of startups pitch the wrong investors. And I did this too. The first round I raised for Ori, I went out. and I pitched all the cell therapy therapeutics investors, the Arches, the Orbimeds, the NEAs, you name it, Atlas, you name it, I pitched them. I said, well, if they have invested in cell therapy companies, surely they must be concerned about manufacturing, and surely they must be interested in what Ori's doing. Wrong, not at all interested in what we were doing, because their investment thesis is around therapeutics, binary outcomes, big wins, everything else goes to zero. Their financial model is built on that. Their risk tolerance is built on that. They're not interested in tools, and they get confused by, well, you've got hardware. Oof, we don't like that. We don't invest in that. This is 2019. So I spent a lot of time pitching people who I thought should be interested in our solution, but weren't. And so you need to make sure, maybe you could find an advisor, or there's some people out there that can help you. If you don't know how to vet these things, find the right investors. Stage, there are investors who invest in pre-seed and seed. They like that stage. They want to take that risk. There's other investors who don't invest until you've got a product and you've reached product market fit, or you've got a certain amount of revenue. I see all the time founders pitching the wrong stage of investor for the stage that they're at, and it's just a waste of time. So you have to call the list, and you have to get to a core set of investors um, that are relevant for you and your innovation, and where it is at its life cycle. The next thing is making sure that you get a warm introduction. I know this is a controversial topic, but just think about your own inbox. How many unsolicited emails do you get trying to sell you stuff every day? Hundreds, literally hundreds of emails every day, and LinkedIn messages about people trying to sell me stuff. So as human beings, we have to have ways to prioritize and filter what's important and what's not. The way venture capitalists do that is that the referral comes from a trusted source. So a portfolio company, another investor, a thought leader in the space, get a referral to a target investor from someone that they know. The only way to break through, all of these, there's several investors out there that say, oh, you can submit a business plan on our website and we promise you you'll look at it. Yeah, they will. Some of them will, but it's just a much harder way to go. So building your network again, building your founder profile, your founder brand, your company brand, all of these things will help you get warm intros to investors. And then once you're in there, make sure that you are focused on those four things we were talking about. Make sure you're not just spending the whole time talking. If your first slide is a deep dive on technology, and so is the other 3 or 4 slides after that, you got to fix it. You got to fix the deck. And ultimately, what will inspire a VC to spend more time with you beyond that first call is that they're interested in the problem you're solving. They connected emotionally with it. They're interested with you as a founder, and they connected with you as a founder, and they're willing to invest time in you. And that is all you want from that first discussion. You're not going to get anyone to say, here's a term sheet on the first call. You're not going to get anyone to say, yes, I'm ready to invest. Your only goal in that first call is to establish rapport and get a second phone call. And if you can it's a formula. It's a formula that you can learn and you can practice. But there's just so many pitfalls and so many areas I see founders fall down, particularly scientific and technical founders, and they're just shooting themselves in the foot. These are lessons that can be learned from myself and others out there in the world who've done it. Do your homework ahead of time. You'll save yourself so much anguish and heartache when you go out to fundraise.
I couldn't agree more, but many people just don't do that. Also on the investment side, many investors hold their teams back and say, don't go out on the market. The important points that you mentioned, do your public relations work before you need money. Get to know the people and the ecosystem. And then the nice thing happens when you know the people, you don't need warm introductions because they come naturally to you.
Mhm.
And this is also something that I experience very often that people call me who I don't know and say, you know this person, can you give me a warm introduction? I don't know you. Why should I do that? And if
Yeah.
it doesn't work, then comes the 9 month period, really fundraising. This is then really the hardcore period where we have to ring people through, and this is more or less a sales funnel at the end of the day. You need to
Mhm.
understand what they want, and then you can pitch and just be patient. Don't try to do a lot at the same time. And then you mentioned an interesting point that you need the right partners and pitch to the right VCs. Um, I mean, fundraising, when you do it, and even when you pitch to the right VCs, you get a lot of no's.
Mhm.
And it's not that, as you said, you pick up the phone, you call one person, and the person says, yeah, I'm super happy. Here is the check, 100 million right on your bank account. It's another process that starts.
Yes.
How, as a human, when you get a lot of no's, what's
Mm.
your secret? How do you deal with that?
Yeah. 153. That's how many no's I got in the last round I was raising.
153.
153. It's hard. I mean, it's, constant rejection is hard. But my first point on the three takeaways from this podcast should be building a business is hard. We talked about doing hard things. It's hard. No one says it's going to be easy. It's hard on you. It's hard on your family. It's hard on your relationships. It's thankless, often work. And fundraising is no exception. It's very hard. So I think you just have to learn to pick yourself up. I always joke in London, I do the West Coast swing. It starts at 9 p.m. in London time and goes till midnight. So, I'll work until 5 or 6, take 2 or 3 hours off, family, dinner, family time, kids go to bed, and then I'll get back on the phone for 3 hours. You need to figure out how to integrate work and life together. I don't really think there's such a thing as work-life balance. It's work-life integration. You got to just fit the pieces together. And that's how I handle it. You schedule the time, you do the work, you make the calls, you'll get the no's as part of that. Just, for whatever reason, doesn't fit. It could be that they're where they are in their fund's life cycle. They're towards the end. They're saving reserves for their portfolio companies. They're out raising a new fund. Partner just left. They're waiting for someone to come in. I mean, there's so many reasons why you could get a no. It has nothing to do with you. It has nothing to do with your company. It has nothing to do with your future potential, potentially. It's just that it's not the right time for that fund, or you caught them on a bad day, or so you can't internalize all of that sort of negativity of, oh, that was my 100th no, oh, it's never going to happen. And if you do, and you'll feel that way for sure. But then you got to get a good night's sleep, go to the gym, and get back at it the next day. And that's, I think I also advise my founders and my portfolio companies, like, you have to take care of yourself first, because you'll be no good to your company if you're tired, if you're stressed, if you're, depressed, if you're not eating well, if you're not sleeping well, if things at home aren't good, you can't serve the company well. So you have to take care of yourself first. And these are ways which help you be resilient, when the no's don't hurt quite as bad. They still hurt, but they don't hurt quite as bad. And when you get to that 154th call and you get a yes, the best feeling. You wouldn't think you have to work so hard to sell part of your business, but you do. You have to work that hard. That's part of the founder journey. You have to get good at fundraising because it's just part of what keeps your company alive.
Yeah, that's true. I couldn't agree more. And this is also where marathon running comes into play. It's training resilience, basically going 42 kilometers,
Indeed.
26.6 miles.
Well, when you go out, so a lot of the marathons take place in the spring, right? April. And then so that means you're training in December, January in London. It's raining, gray, cold. You definitely don't want to get out of bed at 5 a.m. and go running. But you do. It's the same as making that fundraising call. You don't want to stay up till midnight and make another call to San Francisco to a VC, but you do. You do the work, and eventually you get the result.
And this is, in my opinion, where you can learn that processes and plans matter. Because when you have a process and a plan, and in the morning you get up, you don't have to overthink your emotions. It's just, okay, it's Monday, it's a 4K. I lace up my shoes, I get the job done, and then I do the
Yep.
next task on the list.
Absolutely right. Yeah, we use the 17-week marathon training plan, and it just maps it out every day and what you need to do, and you just go do it, and you set it on autopilot. Same, you make 3 outreaches to VCs per day. You have scheduled 2 calls. You do, 5 follow-ups. Just systematize it. You got to program it in, and you do the work, and then you start not even thinking about it. I'm sure your listenership is at least as big or bigger than Stephen Bartlett's. I don't know if you know Diary of a CEO.
Yeah, sure.
Uh, I'm reading his book right now, and he said, I just had to program going to the gym in. I do it every day. I wake up, I don't think about it. I don't care what day it is. I go to the gym, I do the workout. And these are the ways in which highly successful people do things, is that they just systematize because the old phrase about swallowing the frog, doing the hardest thing first. Whatever it is that works for you. But if every day you have to pick the same battle, it's like, oh, I just don't feel like getting out of bed. I don't feel like making that call. I don't feel like going to the gym. It's just going to be too hard. Eventually, inertia will get you. It'll drag you down, and you just stop doing it, and you won't fit in. You just have to take the mental part away and just turn it into a habit. And I just finished Atomic Habits as well. It's a great book on how to build habits and positive habits that have positive outcomes.
Yeah, yeah. I couldn't agree more. Systems is all that counts in life at the end of the day. Good
Mm.
days, bad days, it's part of life. They come and go. But when I have a system, when I have a plan, we just execute at the end of the day, and you don't have to give in and stay in bed and say, "Oh, it's just a bad day. It's raining." It's just no, don't do that.
It's
But
human nature. It's human nature. But yeah, you have to fight human nature.
yeah, absolutely, every single day. I hear very often in the industry these days fractionalized roles. You have a fractionalized CPO, a fractionalized CEO. Um, can you build great business on fractionalized 20 hours, 5 hours, 1 hour, 50 minutes roles?
Uh, um, there is a role for fractional, um, functional leadership, I would say. Does an early stage kind of seed or pre-seed company need a CFO full time? I don't think they do. I think you can get by with 5, 10, 20 hours as you grow. And then, at the right time, you will need to hire in functional leadership. I don't think you can be a founder or a CEO part-time. It's an all encompassing, you know, life consuming experience. And I think my personal perspective is you're either all in or all out. Um, I know a lot of academics try and be part-time founders. They don't want to leave the safety of academia, so they start a company, they get it going, they get it funded, and then maybe they hire in professional management. So maybe for a very short period of time, it's possible. But I think you need people that are full-time dedicated and focused on the success of this business. And that's all they think about, and that they eat, breathe, and sleep it. I do board work in addition to Ori. I'm on the board of a couple of my portfolio companies. And I actually work with a couple of VCs as a advisor or, member of the IC. And I find that those additional outlets, um, because it's all confined to health tech, it's all confined to like the same stage business as Ori is. I find that they're quite complementary. I learned things being a director of another company or being an advisor to a VC. I found that help with Ori and vice versa. So I find them synergistic. But if you're going to try and do something, like I would never go and try and start a like food tech business or a climate tech business or a AI, agent business. It's just so totally different from my experience and my what I do today that I think it would be dilutive. So I think you really need a high level of focus. Maybe there's some complementarity if you want to do some other things, but you need to be highly, always thinking, I do some of my best thinking in the shower about Ori and its problems. So you want someone who's always thinking about your business and the challenges that they face and trying to solve them.
Yeah, I totally agree. If someone wants to build a game-changing company with venture capital, there is no other way than getting a focused team on board and focus on this one thing and move it forward. Otherwise, you can build other things with other life models, but not the unicorns. When we look at the future of your company, of Ori Biotech,
Mhm.
where do you see your company in 10 years?
Uh, our ambition for Ori is to build the leading infrastructure provider in cell and gene therapy. So we want to build the pick and axe supplier that helps the industry move forward, if you will. So the previous leaders, the Thermo Fishers, the Sartoriuses, the kind of Cytivas and Danahers that have really supported biopharma through its journey through biologics and the kind of first and second pillars of medicine. Um, we want to build a competitor to those businesses, but specifically for cell and gene therapy. We want to build the next generation of innovations that really take these products from R&D all the way through GMP. We just brought a gentleman named Tony Hunt onto our advisory board. Tony was the former CEO of Repligen, and I think Repligen's a great model for what Ori wants to be when it grows up. They built a competitor to those companies. At one time was over a $10 billion market cap company, and they did it through innovation. They did it through organic and inorganic growth, and they did it by serving customers really well. And so I think there's a great model there for Ori to become what it wants to become. And that may include, we'll need additional financing in the future. We'll do, another round of private financing. We may do go public at some point so that we can satisfy that ambition. But ultimately, the ambition is to build something that's lasting and that has a huge impact on patient lives. And to do that takes time, takes money. We aren't in this for a short-term flip, build a product and sell it to one of those guys and have them take it to market. We want to build a lasting enterprise that outlast us in our professional lives. And that's the ambition for the company.
So basically, when you succeed with your plan, you target a public company market cap north of $10 billion at the end of the day.
That would be the ambition. We'll see.
Yeah.
Ultimately, you start with 500 million, and then you get to a billion, and then you go to 2 billion, and then maybe you get to 10 billion. But yeah, so ultimately, we need to satisfy the needs of our customers and to drive revenue by working with our partners to deliver great products for patients. And as I advise my founders, if you take care of the business, the exit will take care of itself. Ultimately, if you're trying to build a business for a particular exit or for an outcome, oftentimes you make decisions that hamstring the business from being a self-sustaining going concern.
Mm.
My thesis is that if we build the best business we can with a great kind of metrics and growth and that delights customers, that we'll have lots of exit opportunities. And IPO could be one, sale could be another. But as long as we're building for that outcome, then all of the doors are open to us. If we only build for one particular exit outcome, those other doors are closed to us. And so we are then beholden to that outcome actually coming to fruition. As we've seen for the last 3 years, no one was IPOing. No one was buying anything really. The transactions weren't happening. And if
Yeah.
you had your runway scheduled to achieve that outcome and you missed your window, you're stuffed. So you have to build a resilient business that's self-sustaining and profitable and can grow and to do all those things. And then you'll have lots of options on the outcome that you want to achieve.
Yeah, I totally agree. Resilience is all that counts in business. There are good times, there are bad times, like running. And when you focus on resilience, then you survive the bad times and are there when the good times hit, like Nvidia. I think it was Jensen Huang at a recent conference in the United States with the All In podcast who said he has produced more millionaires and billionaires than any other CEO in a tech company, but it took him 30 years to
Yeah.
get there.
Yeah.
And this is just the way it is.
No, exactly. As I said, I just turned 50 not that long ago. And so I was an operator in the dot-com bubble in the burst after. I was an
Mhm.
operator during 2008 in the financial crisis. And now post 2021, the bubble burst. And when you go through that, you learn to really focus on the important things to build a sustainable business. I've seen too many businesses that were hot and then ran out of money and crashed because they just didn't plan for it. So we closed our Series B. It was a $100 million round at the end of 2021, and rounds were still getting done. Business was still good, but you could tell that the clouds were kind of rolling in, the sands were shifting. And having had that experience a couple of times before, we changed what was then going to be a 2-year use of funds into, we need to make this money last as long as possible and still get to market and still start to deliver revenue and still hit product market fit. But we totally changed our use of funds. Um, I guess muscle memory kicked in from those last experiences. Um, but survival is a strategy. This is what I tell my founders. I'm like, you talk about Airbnb and Uber and some of these companies that were built up in the financial crisis, and they survived other competitors that were better financed, that were ahead of them, that had better technology, but they didn't manage the business well. And so you always have to be thinking about what could go wrong. Good times don't last, and neither do bad times. I hear, I think April of 2025 was probably peak despair in biotech and cell therapy because Trump was announcing a new tariff every day. Then he fired everyone in the FDA and he canceled NIH grants all in 1 week, and everyone was pulling their hair out. And I just said, like, it's not going to be this bad forever. Like, we have to just weather the storm. Survival is a strategy. We need to keep going, keep delighting customers, keep being frugal with our runway, keep being focused on retaining cash. And when the cycle turns, not if the cycle turns, but when the cycle turns, we'll be ready. We'll be ready to accelerate. We'll be ready to capitalize on that opportunity. And we've been able to manage that runway out for 4 years plus, and I'm pretty positive about 2026. I think the rest of 2025 will be, even in the last month or so, we started to see things unlock and CapEx spending increase, and pharma companies coming to us who've been keeping us on the back burner, and they've said, okay, we were engaged now. I could feel it sort of. I'm hopeful about the second half. I think it'll really unlock in 2026. and I can see, the next cycle start then. But got to survive to be in the game. You got to survive, and I
That's
think
true.
too often founders they get a $10 million in the bank or whatever, and they start spending with wild abandon. You got to treat it like it's your own money and make every penny count.
Yeah, totally agree. This is the nice thing when getting older, you survived many crises. People experience many crises. When I look back, it's 1987, big crisis. It didn't last forever. 2000, big crisis, didn't last forever. 2008, especially in Europe, until 2012-ish,
Hmm.
13-ish, big crisis also went by. And now I think in 2025, we are also at the bottom in biotech. And
I agree.
good
Yeah,
steps will come back. Jason, it's really great talking to you. We are at 2 hours already. Time flies.
time
Is,
flew by. Yeah.
is there anything that we miss in this recording? Is there any points that you want to bring across?
I just wanted to reiterate that ultimately what drives value, what drives change in the world is innovation. Innovators, people that work hard with new ideas, new ways to solve problems. Um, you guys are the ones that will change the world. And so in the dark times, when it is hard, when you need to make that extra call and you get that extra no, just keep going. Ultimately, you only have to get up one last time every time you get knocked down, and you never know. The next time could be when you reach success. So don't think it's unique. Don't think it's unusual that you have suffer setbacks or that, you get knocked down or you have bad days or it's really hard. It is. All those things are true, but it's worth it in the end. So just keep going.
Yeah, totally agree. Great final words. Jason, thank you very much for this fantastic conversation. I loved every single minute of it. Keep building the future of cell and gene therapy. I think manufacturing needs a solution and also keep pushing forward to motivate our policymakers to automate and to improve the entire industry so that the best therapies reach the patients.
Awesome. Thanks, Christian. Together, we'll keep doing hard things. I promise.
Yeah, good to know. Good to know. Have a great afternoon and talk